The morning began with rain that softened New York into the suggestion of a city. It quilted the windows, pressed gray light into the carpet, dampened the skyline so the towers looked like memory. I stood at the kitchenette with a paper cup of coffee too thin to deserve the name and watched a single droplet wander down the glass, collecting others until it gained enough weight to fall. The office hummed behind me. Printers, the swivel of chairs, that private language of clacking keys and throats, cleared to fill the places where certainty should be. I had slept badly, the kind of night where every hour presented itself with a little whistle at the side of the bed, reminding me that tomorrow wanted something I didn't know how to give. Change, I thought, has a smell. It is the clean note of copier paper, a trace of new paint beneath recycled air, the citrus on someone's wrist who isn't from here. I felt it at my desk before I sat down. Fresh flowers at reception. A polished brass nameplate leaned against my keyboard, still in its wrapper, as if the building itself had ordered me a surprise I couldn't accept. When I peeled the plastic back, my name shone in black letters tall enough to carry a promise. Asterisk asterisk Margot Hale asterisk asterisk. There had been rumors for weeks. The board had forced a change at the top of corporate finance, a division too well regarded to be dragged but too profitable to leave alone. And the new senior executive, brought in to shepherd the revenue lines that fed the rest of us, was arriving today. He'd been a weather pattern before he was a man. Articles about him read like storm reports. He turned around a debt desk no one believed in, predicted a bearish trend no one wanted, weathered a fund implosion by cutting without blinking. A strategist, they said. A surgeon, someone added. A necessary cold front. His first email to the division was brief. It contained no adjectives and ended with a full stop heavy enough to be a door. We will meet. We will set priorities. We will deliver. It was not unkind. It was simply a line drawn in an invisible place we would discover by stepping over it. I told myself none of this had anything to do with me. I was a junior manager with a tidy book and a reputation for not dropping things. I wrote memos that people borrowed and forgot to return. I knew the tone each director preferred for their decks. I presented like someone who didn't want to. No one had to guess whether I'd be in before 8 or after. I was always there, the same dependable engine in a corner seat with a view of the river you had to lean to see. At 9:30, I carried a fresh legal pad into the main conference room because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. The glass walls gave the impression of transparency that our industry liked to sell to itself. The long table reflected the recessed lights like a river with white petals floating on it. He entered without ceremony, no entourage, no throat-clearing introduction from HR, just the low friction of a precise suit and a man who knew where to put his eyes. I looked at the table. Then I looked at him. His hair had the unbothered gray of a first snowfall, and his jaw held the habit of calculation even when he was simply watching. Later, the office would hunt for other words. Handsome, ruthless, better in person. But my first impression was an odd one. He looked like the answer to a question I hadn't yet asked. He greeted the room without shaking hands. When he spoke, his voice settled into the air like a decision that had been made elsewhere. He did not waste time. He outlined the quarter's shape, the inefficiencies he'd noted, the projects that would be cut, and those that would be starved into something leaner. He asked for 3 numbers no one else would have asked for, and when they came, he nodded as if someone had finally returned a key. At one point, he glanced at me, not at my chair, at me. It was the kind of glance that was not seeking agreement or approval. It was an inventory. I held it. He looked away, and the glass walls caught our almost reflections, two people who hadn't yet met under the polite surveillance of a room built to publish. After the meeting, he asked everyone to send a one-page summary of their priorities by 5. Not a deck, he said. A page. I went back to my desk and kept my hands moving. The rain thickened and patterned the windows with a rhythm that sounded like a clock someone had leaned against my chest. At 4, just when my focus blurred, a calendar invitation bloomed on my screen. MHE with as ***. A meeting title with no verb. 5 o'clock. 30 minutes. Conference room 17C, the room with a plant that was somehow still alive. I printed my page and brought it with me, not because he asked but because paper had weight, and I needed something to hold. He stood by the window as if measuring the distance to something only he could see. When he turned, there was something like amusement in his eyes, the kind one gets when the weather does exactly what you predicted, and everyone is surprised. He asked how long I'd been with the firm. I told him. He asked what I liked to fix. I told him again, though differently. He listened with his hands quiet against the table, and his attention arranged in a way that made me feel taller without standing. When he leafed through my page, his mouth drew in slightly at the corner. "This is not one page," he said, and I prepared to answer, but then he added, "It reads like 5. It was the first compliment I'd had in months that landed anywhere near the place where pride lives. I made a joke that I will not repeat here because it was unworthy of the moment, and he let it lie between us like a stone we could step around. He asked more questions than I could answer without honesty, so I was honest, even about the part of me that liked to organize things no one saw, and the part that hated being invisible anyway. He let a silence open and then closed it with a pairing of words I didn't expect. Vice President ****. I thought I'd misheard. Promotions at our firm came like weather in April, possible, then not, then a sudden sun that burned you if you stepped out without looking. He laid out the practical scale of it, not the flatteries. A team to lead. A budget to monitor. A seat at meetings where decisions are not written down. He spoke without seduction. It was a blueprint, not a promise, and perhaps that was why it sparked against something in me that had been starved of oxygen. Then he leaned closer. The rain had softened to a whisper against the glass, the city catching its breath. He lowered his voice not as if to be secret, but as if to reduce the space a word could travel before it did damage. "You'll hate what comes with it," he said. "There are sentences that lodge in the body." This was one. The first reaction was pride. A wild, startled thing that wanted to insist there was nothing I couldn't endure. The second was fear, which was more honest. I asked him what he meant. He didn't answer right away. He set my page down and folded his hands. He explained that the division's largest client had built an edifice on numbers that behaved like polite guests until midnight, and then stole the silver. Nothing illegal, nothing that would make a prosecutor desire them more than another headline, but the kind of ethical arithmetic that could curdle an institution from the inside. The board wanted the revenue too much to turn away. The compliance team wanted the revenue too much to look too closely, and he had been hired to thread a needle without leaving blood on the thread. The promotion, he said, was tied to this. I would oversee the operational cleanup that would let us keep this client without drowning in their practices. He needed someone with a clean book and a mind good at quiet repairs. He knew my record. He'd seen what I'd rather no one noticed about a portfolio with a missing screw. How I'd found the screw. How I'd put it back without asking to be thanked for bringing tools. I had to ask the question then. It rose like a stone to the surface. Was what he was asking me to do wrong? He considered me for a long moment before answering. What he said was meticulous. We would not falsify, we would not hide. We would expose a structure and rebuild it with brighter bolts. But there would be whispers, because numbers never like to be told to stand in the light. There would be colleagues who would call me knave and others who would call me complicit, depending on what kept them warmer at night. The worst part, he added, would be the way I'd have to carry knowledge I couldn't share. The building would go on humming, and I would walk its halls with a different gravity stitched into my steps. You'll hate the loneliness, he said, and I believed him. I walked out of the room with a promotion in one hand and an ache in the other. The hall smelled like carpet and nothing. I went back to my desk and tried to imagine a life where I'd say yes, and a life where I wouldn't. My past rose like a careful animal from the brush. The divorce I never discussed. The long year after when I learned how to make my voice fill a room, even when I cried in a small place inside myself. I had promised never to pick a life that made me hollow to carry. The formal offer came that night. It was an email shaped like a contract, all the human pieces shaved off so they wouldn't prick anyone. I read it again and again for the part where a person speaks to a person, and though it was not there in text, it was there in the echo of his voice. You'll hate what comes with it. I accepted. The first weeks were work without air. The team I inherited were clever and young and burned at either end. They liked me because I listened, and I could make a project behave. They didn't like that I didn't put things in writing that didn't belong there. Office gossip rose and fell. That I'd been handpicked because I was safe. That I'd been handpicked because I was not. That he and I were something we were not. I let it wash past like a subway I didn't need. He barely visited the floor, and when he did, it was a change in barometric pressure more than a physical presence. He left meetings with less noise than he took into them. He made decisions at a scale that made me feel both small and spared. But sometimes the elevator would open, and he would be there, and we would occupy the same square feet of air like people pretending the ground was a theory. We spoke about work as if those were the only words allowed in that small box with mirrored walls. Yet the heat of proximity did its own quiet arithmetic. I noticed the scent of cedar that wasn't cologne, but the memory of wood. I memorized the line at the edge of his cuff, the way he held himself steady when the car slowed, as if trusting mechanics was a choice. When he looked at me, I felt the better version of myself arrive to stand beside me, and the chorus in the back row of my mind, lonely, careful, cautious, fell silent to hear what she might speak. We traveled to Chicago for the client who had built a house out of bright promises and shadows. The city had a blunt honesty I welcomed. The sky pushed down. The wind insisted. In the conference room 11 floors up, their CFO gave us the numbers like they were sweets and watched to see how quickly we reached for them. I did not. I asked to see the freight costs with the color blurred out. I asked for the variable inputs that no one reads unless they've already lost money. Their CFO smiled the way men smile at women who haven't made the right mistake yet. That night, I worked at the desk by the hotel window while the city flashed advertisements and apologies. I found it then, the line where convenience had snuck in and renamed itself certainty. A formula in a cell that did exactly what it was told, and nothing else. It wasn't a crime. It was a choice. I sat with it like a small animal I didn't want to frighten, trying to coax it into my hands so I could show someone without dropping it. He knocked. He didn't say who it was. He didn't need to. The quiet between us had learned its way to my door. When I opened it, the hallway lit his shoulders as if he were an idea already written down. He looked past me to the desk, the window, the page with the circle around the thing that pretended to be a different thing. He stepped inside and closed the door with a carefulness that made me aware of his hands in a way I had been trying not to be. We spoke softly because the kind of honesty we were about to engage in liked the dark. I showed him what I had found. He took the chair across from me and leaned in, and the heat of his focus narrowed the whole universe to a circle on a piece of paper. He saw it too, the little shift the client had made so that cost became revenue for a day here and a day there, and the year-end shone like polished bone. He asked what I wanted to do. The question surprised me. People like him did not ask people like me for permission disguised as advice. I said what I believed. We needed to disentangle it in a way that did not punish the small workers for a choice their pay grade would never see. We needed to tell the truth without setting the house on fire. He sat back, his jaw turning over the angles. He said it would be ugly. He said if we chose this, the calls would get colder. He said my name. In his mouth, it sounded like something that deserved to be in a sentence with verbs obeying it. We moved so close to one another in that conversation that we needed to lean back to breathe. When we reached the part where language only makes heat worse, we didn't reach for it. He stood. He looked at the window the way a man looks at a road he used to run. He said that every choice like this carried a cost you couldn't put in a spreadsheet, and if I wanted to walk away, he would find someone else to hold the wrench. He meant it. The kindness in the offer scalded me. I didn't walk away. The night folded around us neatly, like a napkin at an expensive dinner. When he touched my elbow to brush past me and leave, the contact was so minimal it should not have had a temperature, and yet it did. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't a preview. It was a line under a sentence neither of us could write yet. The following week began with whispers in the hall. Someone had seen us in Chicago. Someone had invented what they wanted to see. HR sent me a link to the policy with a subject line that could be read as polite or pointed. I closed it without clicking. My work was clean and hard and heavy, and I had no time for the sport of other people's moral arithmetic. He did not come to my floor. He sent notes through someone else. The distance clarified nothing and everything. The crisis arrived on a Wednesday with the decisiveness of a siren. An internal email meant only for legal had been forwarded beyond legal, and then beyond that, until it reached a mailbox that had never been taught not to print. Rumors collided like weather systems and turned the office into a storm. The memo said there was a concern about the client's accounting practices. It used words the press likes to put in headlines. It named no names. It named mine in whispers. By noon, my team had stopped making their voices too bright when they asked me how I was. By 1, the board requested immediate clarity. By 2, he called me into a room without windows. He didn't ask if I was all right. I wasn't, and he could see it. He shut the door and the room breathed like a lung. He told me the truth. One of the senior directors, the kind who sees himself in every new man's mirror, had decided that if he could not own the fire, he would pour water on everything. He had forwarded the memo to the wrong ally and labeled it with my name, implying I had started the inquiry, as if I were knave enough to put my future in an email to someone who would trade it for a warmer seat at a table. It was sabotage by suggestion. He said my name again and the room steadied. He had already handled the board, he said. He had explained that the inquiry predated me and would continue without me. He had offered to put his name on the spines of every binder if it would help. He added that what he could not fix was the office. People like their myths. They would construct one with my face and his in it because that was the better story to tell over drinks than the one about a spreadsheet and a choice. He said he was sorry about that, and his mouth tightened as if he had tasted the cheapness of the apology. I did not cry. I have always been better at letting tears move to a different room and do their work there. I told him we would proceed as planned. He nodded, a single motion that contained assent and respect and something else. Then he did a thing I did not expect. He told me a story. Years ago, he said, early in his career, he'd been asked to look the other way so an institution could defer a loss and celebrate an illusion. He did not. He left a job that made his father proud and a salary that made his mother worry less. He loved a woman then who chased him to a smaller city and a smaller apartment for a year, and then refused to chase him any longer. He told me this without romance and without self-pity. He told it as arithmetic, the equation that produced the man the board had hired, and I was deciding whether to trust. He said the thing he'd learned wasn't that truth is expensive. It was that carrying it is lonely. He said quietly that he had not handled the loneliness well. I felt something in me lift its head then. I had spent the last years becoming a woman who ate dinner alone and learned that solitude is its own salt. I did not want to be lonely anymore, but I also did not want to be less than I had rebuilt myself to be. We walked back into the office separately and behaved like workers under a sky that had decided to storm in the afternoon. The next days were bare-knuckled. We pulled threads and rewove them with clean fiber, and the client, who had always believed they could purchase the weather, learned that we would not sell them a forecast. Their CFO smiled less and invited us to dinner more, as if warmth could seduce math. It could not. When he tried to dress our insistence up as stubbornness, I named it stewardship, and the word surprised me in my own mouth, because I had not heard it at work in a very long time. In the evenings I went home and sat in a small quiet with a glass of water and closed my eyes to listen to the city breathe through the window. Sometimes the phone lit with a message from him that was only logistics. Sometimes it did not. The distance protected us and built pressure that had nowhere to go. The night it broke was not dramatic. There were no locked doors, no candles pretending to be something nobler than electricity. We were the last two in the building. The cleaners had left the smell of lemon behind them. I stood by the copy room looking at the city as if it were a theater, and he came and stood beside me with his hands in his pockets, a posture that always unmade me a little, because it was as if he had decided to be only a person for a moment, not a force. He said very softly that he had not been able to decide if it was crueler to be near me or not. He said he had tried to be wise and found he was only tired. He did not tell me he wanted me. He did not need to. All the wanting had settled in the room already, a climate we had created with months of restraint. I turned to him, and I let the small, honest version of me that still turned her face up for rain step toward him. Our lips met in the way a decision becomes inevitable. There was no performance. There was no theft. There was only the heat of something finally permitted to exist, and the careful reverence of two people who knew how fragile good things were. If I were telling this to a friend over coffee, I would tell her that we kissed for a very long time and that the world lost its corners. If I were telling it to myself in the privacy where I keep my better memories, I would say, the night faded around us, leaving only breath and promise. We parted without drama and went home light and heavy in equal measure. The next morning, the office looked like it always did. The flowers at reception had begun to wilt despite their good intentions. The sky held back its rain and then got bored and offered it anyway. He kept his hands to himself. I kept my eyes on the work. No one would have noticed a difference except for the piece of me that had gone somewhere and returned brighter. There are consequences for loving someone at work, even when no rule is broken. The human mind has a talent for pattern, and it draws pictures wherever there is dust. The senior director who had started the rumor war called me into an office with a view of a brick wall and asked me if I had any concerns. He used the word optics and expected me to flinch. I did not. I told him the project was proceeding according to plan. I told him what I would tell anyone under oath. I told him he should worry less about optics and more about outcomes, and he blinked like someone who had set a trap and caught the wrong animal. We finished the work. We issued a report to the board that a public would have liked if they had been invited to read it. The client altered their practices with the resentful willingness of anyone who wants to keep eating at the same restaurant. Revenues dipped and then returned. The press did not speak our names. The office sharpened its stories about us in private, only to find they dulled quickly against the surface of nothing happening in public. Then he called me into the room with the plant again and told me he was leaving. It was a board decision, he explained, like weather with a signature. He had done what they'd hired him to do. He had also done what they had not asked for and did not enjoy. He had refused to dress the numbers in clothes they didn't own. He said it calmly. He said he'd known a man like him is invited to dinner to do the carving, not to comment on the recipe. He reached for no bitterness. And it rose anyway, a scent I recognized in myself. I felt the floor tilt. He told me I would be fine. He said it not like a pat on the head but a forecast made from data. He said the team respected me. He said the work would go on and would need someone who cared enough to be careful. He did not say what we would do with us, with the tenderness we had coaxed out of the office like a wild thing that sometimes let itself be pet. He breathed, as if a sentence hurt to carry. Then he said that he had a job offer across town that would not entangle me with him in any way that would stain. If we wanted to, after the dignified silence that time requires, we could be something seen. If we didn't, we would know that what we had belonged to something the world cannot tax. He asked nothing more specific, and in that restraint was a respect that made me ache. The days that followed were half alive. He made the round of polite farewells and gathered his life into a box no one could see. He did not touch me at work. He did not even stand too near. But in the quiet privacy of an elevator that became a church, he let his gaze rest on mine long enough to put a map in my pocket. We walked out of the building on his last day, at different times, and into a city that had decided to shine to spite the forecast. I went home. I made tea I would not drink. I looked at the empty half of my couch where my marriage had lived and died, and then I walked to the park where the late sun set every bench in praise. My phone lit with a message that said nothing more than a street name and a time. It was enough. I met him at a place with low lights and the sound of jazz, like someone whispering apologies in a language you really wanted to understand. He sat at a corner table, as if the room had been designed around the shape of him. I sat and let the sight of him, freed of the building's obligations, the small softening at the mouth that work had been keeping hostage, be the first real kindness either of us had dared to give the other. We spoke like people with nothing left to perform. He told me about the company across town that wanted courage at a discount, and how he decided he would not sell it cheap. I told him about the team and the ways they were sharper now, less frightened of their own power. He told me he had been married once and now was not. He did not say why, and I did not ask. He said he did not want to be lonely anymore in the way he had been lonely. I said I had begun to believe loneliness was a room I could decorate and stay in forever, and that he had opened a window I had not known would open. We left together but not touching. The street had the clean smell that comes after rain when the city forgives itself for a few blocks. He took my hand then, not in a way that claimed but in a way that checked if my hand wanted to be held. It did. We walked without hurry. The night threw our shadows ahead of us like predictions that were kinder than the past. What we made for ourselves after that was not dramatic. It would have disappointed the office for its lack of spectacle. It was dinners where food tasted less like duty and more like language. It was mornings where quiet had a companion and no longer needed to pretend to be courage. We let time pass because time is the only honest way to learn whether tenderness can survive Monday. It did. A month later, the board published a press release about a successful transition and congratulated themselves. The client sent a basket. HR sent a reminder about the policy I still didn't click. My team exceeded a target that had been considered ambitious only because the person who wrote it had not yet met them. He and I began to appear in public in the light kind gives to faces. There was a final test. The senior director who had thrown the memo like a grenade shook my hand in a hallway and smiled a smile he meant to land like a knife. He told me I had done well and let the compliment be half a question. I took my hand back, wiped my palm against my skirt as if I had touched rain on a dirty window, and said nothing. The power of refraining from speech is not in silence. It is in the witness it offers yourself. I saw myself stay intact. It felt like climbing a hill barefoot and finding the ground kind underfoot. We did not move in together. We did not fetch paint chips. We let the year adjust and then adjust again. On a Sunday in late fall, we walked along the river where the geese made their arguments in the water, and the sun turned the city to a possibility again. He asked about my day at a scale a man asks when he will remember the answer next week. I told him about my mother's call and the way she had said she was proud without swallowing something harder. He told me his father had started to ask him to come to Thanksgiving again without lining the request in shame. Little salvations. When we stopped at the railing and looked at the water moving like math, he put his hand at the small of my back and said there was a conference in Seattle in 2 months, and if I wanted, we could go and pretend we had met there for the first time, just to feel how it is to begin without the building watching. I told him we could do that, but that I liked beginnings best when they remembered the weather they came from. He smiled, a quiet private thing, and the space between us was smaller than a heartbeat. I moved anyway. The winter arrived with a calm we had not earned but accepted. When the office emptied at night, the lights clicked off row by row like stars that didn't owe us anything. I stayed late sometimes and watched my reflection in the glass waver into a shadow and then become only the city. There was a time when that sight would have made me ache. Now I let it pass through me and leave warmth behind. If you ask me whether I hated what came with the promotion, I will tell you the truth. I hated the part where you carry information like a secret you never consented to hold. I hated the way rumor makes poets of cowards. I hated the distance 2 people must keep because of a policy written by someone who never fell in love in the wrong room. But I loved what else came. The work that mattered when done clean. The team that learned they could stand taller than they were asked to. The man who whispered a warning and delivered it with a respect that let me choose. The way breath and promise can live in a single room and not burn it down. Months later, in a different office with windows that faced a different river, he came to meet me at the end of the day. We stood in the glass foyer where the city gathered itself into evening, and the jazz from a nearby bar drifted in like memory. The lights dimmed one by one, not all at once, but in a patient sequence that felt like grace. I looked at his reflection next to mine and thought about the arithmetic of a life. How some choices cost and some pay, and how sometimes if you carry the numbers with care, a balance appears that no one can see until they stand where you are. He touched my hand. His shadow lingered near mine. We walked out into the night that smelled like rain that hadn't decided yet, and let the city keep our secrets. No, not secrets. Our private truths that did not need headlines. The kind that grow best in the gently lit space between two people who have learned that power is not in the whisper you make others hear, but in the voice you keep and use when you are alone. And this is how I remember it. Coffee that tasted like effort, glass that reflected more than it revealed, a promotion with a cost printed nowhere, a crisis that measured what I was made of, a kiss that rearranged my map, and an ending that wasn't an ending. Only the quiet kind of beginning that comes after we tell the truth and keep telling it, even when the room tries to teach us how to lie. I used to think a career was a ladder pressed against a wall, and you climbed because climbing is what you do until the roof appears. Now I know it is a series of rooms with doors you choose, and sometimes the best doors are the ones that open onto a balcony where two people can stand, look at the city that still looks like a memory, and feel, without saying it, that they have made something worth not hiding. The office would keep humming. The weather would keep in constant faith. The printer would jam and then forgive. And me, I would keep the page he'd once held and return to its margin where his thumb had left the faintest impression, a human mark on a paper that never admitted to being touched. Work would end most days with a dimming of lights that had learned our names. His shadow, steady, familiar, would linger near mine. And the city with its rain and its glass and its rumors would watch us walk away, not to vanish but to live, which is the quietest scandal and the truest one.